So as academics or researchers, we often, or one saying that we very much enjoy is a saying by Kurt Lewin that said, there's nothing as practical as a good theory. However, often we find that in practice, or individuals in practice find that there's a disjoint between academia and practice. But I really think the department's niche area of affirmative development really tries to bridge this gap, and it tries to really look at the challenges that we are facing as a country and how we can come up with theories or solutions to actually address that problem or the challenges that we are facing. So that's how I would like to start this discussion, is to firstly give you more insight into the motivating factors or the driving factors behind my research. Now, since 1994, extensive processes and policies have been geared towards the transformation or the redistribution of economic, social, and political resources and power in the country. Now, in the 17 years of our democracy, we have made significant way in terms of social development and workplace transformation. However, if we look at the current change or the pace at which this change is taking place, it's not sufficient to meet the challenges that we are facing as a country. In actual fact, what international and national economic and social indicators are showing is that we are actually regressing in terms of economic and social performance. So there are three challenges that we are currently faced with that I would like to highlight. The first one is unemployment. The third quarter of this year showed that we have an official unemployment rate of approximately 25%. This is according to the narrow definition. So this refers to individuals that were actively seeking employment 1 week before the interview took place. It doesn't even take the broader definition into account, which shows that it's actually more in the line of 35 to 37%. So this also includes the individuals that are actually have been discouraged or are not actively looking for work. The second problem I would like to, or challenge that we are faced with that I would like to highlight is poverty. So in 2010, it was indicated that 26% of our population live below the national poverty line of 515 Rand a month. Okay, so this works out to about 17 Rand per day for an individual. Also, if we look at the statistics, we are seeing that we are a nation that is increasingly relying on social grants as a means of survival. Last year, the figure was of almost 17 million compared to the figure in 1998, which stood at about 2.5 million. Okay, so a rapid increase in the number of social grants that are being handed out. The next problem that we are faced with is inequality. They say that today South Africa is more divided by income equality than by racial inequality. If we look at the distribution of resources or income in the country, we see that 70% of our resources or the income accrued sits with the richest 20%, and the poorest 10% only has access to 0.6% of the income in the country. So a major underlying problem to all these challenges that we are faced with is skill shortages. The skills or these skills shortages, the national skills crisis that we are facing leads to poor service delivery, poor economic growth, inequity, and it just makes our economic or global competitiveness as a country so much more difficult. So the skills, knowledge and abilities that we have in our country is not equally distributed across all races. So the question is now, what can we actually do to address these challenges that we are faced with? And skills development presents one key solution that we can focus on to address these challenges. Given our emphasis on transformation, affirmative action development programs in particular present a practical means through which we can address these challenges. So what is affirmative action program's all about. So it's about equipping individuals with a job competency potential and job competencies that they need to achieve success on the job. If we look, however, at the current state of affirmative development programs, how it's currently being implemented in South Africa, it paints a rather dismal picture. In 2008, of about 6,800 participants that were enrolled in learnerships, only 65% completed their learnership, 15% terminated their studies, and 20% were still registered but have not completed their learnership. A different source, the Mail and Guardian, report incompletion rates of approximately 80%, and Alexander even reports incompletion rates as high as 90%. Okay, so this makes the effectiveness of these affirmative action programs highly questionable. So what is the reason for the poor state of affairs of these affirmative development programs? One of the major reasons that are cited is the poor recruitment and selection of learners into the skills development program. A second reason that is cited is the insufficient support mechanisms in the programs. And thirdly, the poor quality of the training is often cited as a major reason for the termination of the programs, but also as a reason for participants not gaining employment even after they have obtained their qualification. And this is where the whole concept of learning potential comes into play, especially if we look at the first reason provided for the unsuccess or insuccess of the affirmative development programs. So learning potential focuses on identifying the individuals with the highest probability or highest likelihood to develop or to obtain success in the affirmative action or training opportunities. Specifically, the learning competency models developed thus far by the Goede, Burger and Van Heerden focus on three areas. It focuses both on the individual and the situation, and more specifically, looking at the individual, it looks at non-malleable, so those are more fixed, stable characteristics of the individual that affect the learning performance in the training. It then also looks at the more malleable, so this implies that it's subject to influence or to manipulation, what variables, what role they play in the learning performance of these students. And then it also looks at the situational variables. So the non-malleable variables that play a role in the affirmative development programs or the performance of the learners suggest that these are fixed. Okay, so there's nothing really that we can do to further enhance them. They're either genetically or biologically determined. Okay, so it's your God-given potential, if I could put it that way. So what this suggests is that when we select individuals, we need to select them based on those non-malleable individuals, to identify those, or variables rather, to identify those that have the highest likelihood of obtaining success in the programs. The malleable variables suggest that, as I said, that they can be manipulated. This suggests that they can be developed, and this should be the focus, or this suggests that it should be the focus in the learning or affirmative development programs. So the learning potential models thus far suggest that learning performance is determined by the individual as well as the situation. And if we look at the literature, what it says is that one of the key or one of the most critical experiences or factors in the learning process is the trainer. And I want you to think about your career as a student or as a learner at school, and think of what was probably your most prominent or the most prominent factor in your learning experience. So this indicates that in order to achieve success or to have successful development or development interventions, we need to focus on the student, Okay, so what makes the effective students? The students with the highest learning potential, the effectiveness of the trainer, and then also the effectiveness of other training program elements such as the content, the structure, the sequencing, etc. And only if these three components are present that it will result in successful training interventions. So the trainer-instructor plays a critical role and can significantly contribute to the development, the efficacy and the future performance of the affirmative action employees, the utility of training initiatives as well as organizational performance. What we ultimately try to achieve in the affirmative development programs is to give these individuals the job competency potentials and the competencies to succeed in the training, but then also to succeed in the job. Okay, so just to demonstrate the salience of the trainer-instructor, so if there's one movie in particular or one character in particular that captures this essence or the importance of or the role of the trainer-instructor, it's Mr. Keating from the Dead Poets Society, also known as Captain, my Captain. So how do these actually link together? The student or the training program, the teacher, the trainer, and then the job. So we can actually see it as three interlinked or sequentially linked competency models. Each model consisting of the competency potential, so this is really the knowledge, skills, and attitudes or abilities of the individual. The competencies, which refer to the behaviors, and then also the outcomes, the job outcomes, the training or the training outcomes. So if we look at the competency model for the trainer-instructor, this would typically refer to the knowledge, skills and abilities, the competency potential of the training-instructor, the competencies they need to display in order to be successful, and then the training outcomes or the job outcomes they need to achieve. If we then think about how this actually links to the student or the learning potential model, the training context, once again, the student has certain knowledge, skills and abilities that they need to display during training. They also have behaviors or competencies they need to display, and then they also have certain training outcomes or learning outcomes they need to achieve, which is typically learning performance. So the link between these two is actually the training outcomes that the trainer needs to achieve is the competency potential of the student or the learner. Okay, so what the trainer actually needs to influence is the knowledge, skills and abilities of the malleable knowledge, skills and abilities of the learner. Similarly, the learning potential model links then to the job competency model, and once again the training outcomes achieved in the training program forms the foundation or is the knowledge, skills and ability or competency potential of the job competency model, the job for which that employee is being developed. Okay, does this make sense? So what was the overall research objective? So to be honest, it would be a bit ambitious to look at competency potential variables, competencies and training outcomes for the training instructor model. So we chose to only focus on the competencies and the training outcomes for the instructor. So we wanted to identify what these training competencies are that the training instructor needs to display to achieve success in the job, what the training outcomes are that they need to achieve, and then how these competencies and training outcomes are causally related, and then testing the overall model and these causal paths. Okay, so this was the starting point, and this is the learning potential model. So unfortunately I can't go into detail on all these variables. But this was basically the starting point of my literature study. So I had to go through all the learning potential variables and basically assess whether each variable, was it fixed, was it non-malleable, or was it malleable, subject to the influence of the trainer. So based on the literature study, I then elaborated on the learning potential model. So the variables you see in red are the variables that were included in the learning potential model, and the variables in black and green are the additional variables, either trainer-instructor competencies or training outcomes that I added to the model. So to actually test this model would be very challenging, so we decided to reduce the model. And what we focused on was 3 training outcomes or learner or student competency potential variables. And these 3 were learning motivation, mastery goal orientation, and academic self-efficacy. Learning motivation basically refers to a desire to spend energy and effort on the learning material. Mastery goal orientation refers to the extent that the student believes in learning as an end in itself, learning for the sake of growth and development, as opposed to a performance goal orientation, where the focus there is actually on outperforming my colleagues in my class or fellow students, or not being the lowest performer on the class. Okay, so it's more, the performance goal orientation is more, learning is more a means to an end than an end in itself. Third variable that we focused on was academic self-efficacy, and this refers to the students' belief that they can successfully perform certain tasks or behaviors to achieve a particular academic task. And this was basically the crux around which my whole model centered, in particular learning motivation. You can see that learning, almost all the arrows point or lead up to learning motivation. So this was the crux of the model. I'm not going to go into detail into each of these variables. There are, however, a few things that I want to highlight. 2 additional situational variables that I added was learning climate, and this refers to the general atmosphere in the class related to teacher support, autonomy support, a psychologically safe environment, and then we also one where there's involvement and interest in the learning material. The other situational variable that we included in the model was mastery goal structure, and this refers to the emphasis in the class. Is it on performance, on actually achieving good marks, or is it learning is important for the sake of growth and development? And because mastery goal orientation has been consistently found to lead to positive learning outcomes, we focused only on the inclusion of mastery goal orientation and goal structure. So 2 additional situational variables were included in the model. There are 2 other variables that I would like to highlight, and these are my favorite variables in the model. They refer to inspiring professional vision and providing inspirational motivation, the competency. So inspiring professional vision is a student competency potential variable that basically refers to the fact that the student has this vision in their mind that they can be the successful professional employee that contributes successfully to the organization and to society. The providing inspirational motivation is the competency that the trainer needs to display to lead to this vision being established in the student's mind. So this is almost a more transformational variable, and it was inspired by transformational leadership constructs. Okay, so then we went ahead and we tested the model. Our research design was this ex post facto correlational design. We tested the model on a sample of 563 students, the majority of who were black, almost 99% were black students. It was quite a lengthy questionnaire, 176 items. When we had our data, we conducted item analysis, both classical measurement theory and item response theory. We also conducted exploratory factor analysis to assess the unit dimensionality of the scale, confirmatory factor analysis, to fit the measurement model, and then we also tested the whole structural model and the causal parts. Okay. So what the results actually indicated in the end, after three rounds of model modification, we obtained acceptable fit. And of the 14 structural parts that we tested, only 3 were rejected. Okay, and these are the parts that we see in red. The parts in blue are the additional parts that were included after evaluating the modification indices. So just some of the results that I want to share with you. Once again, I can't go through all the parts, unfortunately. Somewhat disappointingly, we did not find support for the path between inspiring professional vision and learning motivation, but this result was found after we included the path from inspiring professional vision to learning climate. Okay, so although not a direct effect, we could see that it's rather indirect via learning climate. We also didn't find support for the moderating effect of mastery goal structure on the relationship between mastery goal orientation and learning motivation. And probably the strangest result that we obtained was, although this hypothesis was not rejected, we found that the nature of the relationship was different than expected. So we hypothesized a positive relationship, and what the results actually indicated was a negative relationship. So that was somewhat surprising. Overall, what was quite encouraging is that we saw that these situational variables that we added and also the trainer competencies all had an effect on the student competency potential latent variables that we wanted it to influence. So there was a significant amount of support found for our hypotheses in the end. So there are some of the practical implications that I would like to share with you. So as Kurt Lewin said, there is nothing as practical as a good theory. So what does this actually mean in the end? How does this translate into practice? I think the first thing that the research highlighted was the importance of the training instructor to focus on those malleable competency potential latent variables. Those that are actually subject to his influence, that he can manipulate, that he can improve and further enhance. Specifically, learning motivation, mastery goals orientation, and academic self-efficacy. So by displaying these competencies, the trainer can actually further enhance those competency potential latent variables. I think the second implication is that we need to consider these, or using these trainer competencies in the selection and recruitment of trainers. So although my model only focused on the competencies and not the competency potential latent variables of the trainer, you can design exercises such as competency-based structured interviews, work samples, or job simulations to assess individuals or job applicants on these competencies before selecting them into the role. In future, possibly some other researchers will extend on this model, and then they can possibly identify those competency potential latent variables, and once those are identified, we can also select trainers on those identified variables. The third implication is that the competencies can once again form the foundation of training and development of the trainer instructor. So once selected, we can actually develop and train them on how to display these behaviors and create these favorable situational characteristics in the classroom. Another practical implication which links to the previous one is the performance management of trainer instructors. So we can design an appraisal instrument based on these competencies. So rather just focusing on training outcomes such as grades or pass rates, for example, or class attendance, we can actually focus on not necessarily the what they are doing, but also on the how. So how are they actually performing, or how are they getting how are they getting to these training outcomes? So I think this is also probably a discussion point that we can look at afterwards, is what is this implication for the university and the evaluation of lecturers for universities and colleges. So if we look at the current student evaluation forms that we are using, none of these competencies are looked at or even implied. We are looking at quite superficial constructs when we are rating lecturers. And the question is, does this really lead to the development of the students? And yet another practical implication is, now that we know what the variables are and what the situational characteristics are that can positively influence the competency potential of the student, we can also design our activities and structure our classroom content around these competencies and situations. So we can design activities that actually enable these competencies to come to the fore, with the opportunity to then develop and influence them. And the last practical implication that I would like to mention, so as I said, so training is not just for the sake of training. We train to give individuals the job competency potential variables and the job competencies to actually be successful in the job place. So we can almost look at transferring this whole model to the workplace. So the classroom learning now becomes action learning in the workplace. And instead of the trainer, the line manager now becomes the trainer in this action learning work context. So the same behaviors that the trainer had to display in the classroom becomes equally important to display for the manager in the work context. So this could actually have a significant role on the job performance of the employee, and then also of the organization as a whole. Okay, thank you.